He's been given 48 hours to try and find a way out of the political stalemate. Sébastien Lecornu tasked with pulling very divided sides of Parliament together and get a working government up and running. Things not looking good, however, as a call for a meeting of all of his parties at his offices has already been rejected by the head of the right-wing Les Républicains, who want a one-on-one meeting. Meanwhile, on the left, parties divided too, some calling for President Emmanuel Macron's resignation. Well, we can cross now live to Antonia Kerrigan, who's at the Prime Minister's offices for us this morning. Antonia, an unenviable task, asked to piece together a so-called platform of action and stability for the country by the end of the day on Wednesday. What's the latest?
Well, as you say, there's one last chance for Sébastien Lecornu's government, a chance he did not necessarily ask for, but one entrusted to him by the president. He spent a month looking for deals, looking for consensus, looking for small ways to reach across the aisle to broaden his base in Parliament. When he did, it lasted 14 hours, and he's got to now do it again, but this time with the sword of Damocles over his head, with the implicit threat by Emmanuel Macron of potentially calling new elections if he fails. So at 9 o'clock, so in just under an hour here at the Prime Ministerial residence, we're expecting leaders from the various parties of the small coalition of centrists and the Conservative right that made up his base of support in Parliament for that brief month. That's the leaders of Renaissance, Emmanuel Macron's party, expected of the Modems, that's François Bayrou's party, the UDI. Separately, though, the Republicans, although invited, their leader will not be attending. That's Bruno Retailleau, the person who felt the most personally aggrieved by a so-called breach of confidence between himself and the Prime Minister on Sunday. He has separately requested a one-on-one meeting. The Senate leader of the Republicans will nevertheless be attending. But for the leader of Horizon, the party of Édouard Philippe, without the presence of Bruno Retailleau, this meeting has no mandate, so Édouard Philippe will not be attending either. These names may seem vague, but suffice it to say it's not a promising start as Sébastien Lecornu tries to salvage the government he announced on Sunday, but having spent 24 hours in massive turmoil, a huge number of shots fired across the bow from all sides. It's not an enviable task, and it seems an almost implausible hypothesis that he succeeds.
Antonia Kerrigan at Prime Minister's offices in central Paris. Thanks very much indeed. Well, we can speak now to Associate Professor in Politics and International Relations at John Cabot University in Rome, Nicholas Startin. Thanks so much for joining us on France 24. Well, we've heard what our reporter on the ground had to say, Mr. Startin, but how do you see it? Any chance that Lecornu could pull these sides together?
If I'm honest with you, I think it's rather unlikely that he will be able to pull the various strands together. I remember being on your show about 5 weeks ago, and we were saying that it looked very, very complex for a prime minister to get any prime minister that Macron selected to get any working parliamentary majority. And it's doubly complicated because, you know, France needs this budget to be passed. And I can't really see a way through for Sébastien Lecornu in terms of him brokering a kind of coalition where he will command a majority in the French National Assembly.
So where does France need to go from here then? Does it have to? Is the quickest way out of this to once again hold snap elections?
Well, you know, he's got various options. The nuclear option would be that he stands down and calls for presidential elections, which is what some on the radical left would like. But I think that's very unlikely. That doesn't really fit with how the French constitution works. I think the more likely option will be that he'll be forced to go for parliamentary elections again. When he did this last time after the European elections back in the summer last year, it didn't work out particularly well for Macron and all the centre parties, because what we saw was a kind of reinforcement of the populist radical right with the Rassemblement National and the populist radical left with the kind of NUPES coalition. So that option may be the only option open to him, but it could weaken further the centre. The other option he has is that he looks for another prime minister, but I'm not sure that French public opinion is going to really tolerate him, looking for what would be an eighth prime minister since he was elected first in 2017. And I guess the fourth option, which is the one he's trying right now, is the short-term option to see whether Lecornu, the current prime minister, former defense minister, can actually broker some kind of coalition. But I think it looks pretty unlikely at this stage. I think there's just too much polarization, too much animosity. And I would be surprised if Lecornu was able to form a working cabinet and government and then get that to the French National Assembly with a majority.
Okay, so if we went down the new Prime Minister route, it would be the eighth Prime Minister, but so far, Macron hasn't given a chance in that role to either, somebody from the largest bloc that's in Parliament of the left or someone from the largest party in Parliament. Is that not something he should now address? Maybe give it to somebody from the left or indeed from the far right?
Well, absolutely. This is the problem I think he faces. As you point out, the parliamentary arithmetic would point to potentially a prime minister with a coalition from the left or potentially from the populist right. I think he's obviously very wary to go down either of those routes because I think he feels that a centrist politician, a centrist prime minister is perhaps able to unite France more. But the irony of this is actually the way it's moving, looking at the centrist prime ministers and their attempts to unify a parliamentary majority, it's not working at all. So there may be a case for a moderate socialist prime minister who looks to gander a sort of parliamentary majority from the centre left and the centre, potentially the centre right. That could be an option, but we'd have to see, how that develops over the next 48 hours after Lecornu's had his attempt to rejuvenate a cabinet and a potential parliamentary majority. One thing's for sure is I don't think he'll go for a Rassemblement National prime minister. Potentially he could consider a Republican prime minister, someone like Rateau, but whether that would work out, I'm not sure either. That said, if there are parliamentary elections, I think the Rassemblement National will be set to do better than they did in the previous election. And we could also see more MPs from the populist radical left. I think it may well be the centre left, the centre, and potentially the centre right that takes the hit if we have further parliamentary election.
Of course, we have to wait, as you were saying there, until Wednesday evening to see exactly where things may go. Between now and then, is there any particular issue that Lecornu could focus on to try and sway people from either side? I mean, it has all broken down because of the budget, but is there something he can focus on to bring people back his way?
I think it is essentially the budget, which is the big issue that needs to resolve. The euro has fallen against the dollar. France needs to pass its annual budget. It's got a big problem with debt. I think you can sugarcoat it with the various parliamentary parties by kind of saying there are other issues that we need to look at, but essentially this is about trying to get a coalition government where there is a majority to pass some kind of emergency budget. And I don't think there's any other real issue that is hanging over this, which he'll be able to use to get other parties on board. I think it really does come down to this notion of we need to get this budget issue, the annual budget, sorted. And that's the big blocking point that all the prime ministers have faced really in the last couple of years, is how do we get this kind of budget across the line when we have a very splintered French National Assembly. And when you think about it, the populist radical left are looking for something very different perhaps to what the centre is after, and then the populist radical right have got different priorities. So it is a very challenging situation for Lecornu, and I think if he pulls it off over the next 48 hours, that would political achievement on his part.
Okay, Mr. Nicholas Startin, Professor in Politics and International Relations, thanks very much indeed for your time and your analysis.